All right, Nuggets fans, welcome into Pickaxe and Roll, an emergency episode brought to you by our good friends over at Bet Online and number 38. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn, at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I'm excited to talk about Dario Saric. Very excited for some actual news, although I gotta tell people, not exactly the most convenient time for this news to break. I was out in Hugo, Colorado with my relatives, celebrating 4th of July belatedly with them. Just trying to get out there, hang out. I thought, there's not going to be any Nuggets news at this point. We're 6 days into free agency. Well, lo and behold, right in the middle of us playing a game, it breaks, and I now have to scramble and drive 90 minutes back into the city and do what I can to make things happen. But look, nobody's really complaining. It's nice to have some Nuggets news, some Nuggets positivity. And I think that this is a positive signing. This is a good place for the Nuggets to be with a player like Dario Saric. And that is going to be a fun thing to talk about. We'll get into that. We'll get into what I think Vlatko just also signed, according to Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype. We will get into that as well as the Russell Westbrook dynamic of this. Should be good. And you are right, Boyan. It is Saric. Saric. It is not Saric. It is Saric. I will do my best as a dumb American. It is in my DNA to get names wrong, so I will do my best to to make it happen. But either way, we will have a good time with it. Looking forward to be able to talk about the homie Dario. Should be very interesting. But first, I want to tell everybody that this podcast, as you know, it is sponsored by our good friends over at Bet Online, your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right onto the top fights with UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads when the games are being played. Bet Online when the game starts here. And by the way, head over to their website and use their promo code BELIEVE for 50% off your free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Okay. Dario Saric, going to be part of Denver's rotation, you got to imagine. We'll talk about him and like what the actual rotation looks like in the second segment. Third segment, we'll get into some of the other stuff. But first, Dario Saric goes to Denver for the taxpayer mid-level exception. That was the only way that this was going to happen, and it was reported 2-year, $10.6 million contract. That is what the mid-level exception is for Denver, because they are a tax-paying team, because they are in between the first apron and the second apron. They get access to this one little exception. It's about a $5.2 million contract that they can throw around to various players that don't necessarily want the minimum, would like a little bit more than that, and also want to play for a competitive team. That is what Denver had with their flexibility. I thought that they would be able to do a little bit more on the trade front. They decided to go a different direction with Reggie Jackson. We'll get into that in segment 3. But I do think also there's an error in your graphic. I'm sure that's the salary cap is what you're talking about, Hurricane. I'm sure that there probably is an error there. But Denver at this point, they did not have a lot of flexibility to sign different players. All they had at their disposal, other than maybe some sign and trade scenarios for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, was this taxpayer mid-level exception and minimum contracts, other than trades, in which they're probably going to trade for. They're probably going to trade there. Hurricane, it says podcast sponsor here because I would like somebody to pay for a sponsorship to be on the front page. So far, nobody has paid to do that. Also, I'm just being like a complete ass about it. That's really what this is. I think that Dario is going to be very, very helpful. And like, he's probably the best big man. I wrote this in my article on, I wrote this in my article on Mile High Sports when I was writing about the top 25 different like players, trades, and free agents that Denver could potentially sign. Here's verbatim what I wrote for Dario Saric. I wrote about him in the minimum contract section. I thought that he would get a minimum. So this is a little bit pricier than I expected, but quote from me, another reason for the solid Warriors bench was Dario Saric, who is in a similar stage of his career as Daniel Tice. Saric is a better passer and scorer and is still decent as a defender due to his rebounding and smarts. He's not quite the second unit option that a Kelly Olynyk would be, but he's a good enough passer that he could handle some responsibility. Perhaps the best big man option behind Bitadze and Drummond. Goga Bitadze, Andre Drummond. Drummond got the taxpayer mid-level as well. Got the same contract from the Philadelphia 76ers that Saric would be there. And it's not a surprise to me that he is getting it. It's not a surprise because there are skills that he's going to bring to the table. It's unfortunate for Denver that they can't save this taxpayer mid-level for another player to potentially add somebody that would want to get out on the market again next year. I know that guys like Gary Trent Jr. Were thrown out there by different Nuggets fans. I hadn't heard anything about Denver being interested there, but I do think that the Nuggets would have loved to be able to throw that out. It was reported by, I think, Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype that the Nuggets were kind of dangling this taxpayer mid-level exception as something that they could sign to other players who are like higher level players than Dario at this point. And Hurricane's making me laugh really hard in the comments. I think the Nuggets were trying to dangle that taxpayer mid-level as a higher level option for teams or for different players in free agency. They didn't ultimately get to it. I think that's one of the reasons why they ultimately just signed Dario to this deal. It became clear, I believe, with DeMar DeRozan going to Sacramento. I think that Gary Trent Jr. is going to sign for double-digit figures, 8 figures to go back to Toronto in all likelihood. Miles Bridges signed for $25 million a year. There are so many teams that have flexibility to be able to give these guys larger contracts than the Nuggets. And when you look around at the landscape with all these other free agents that are left, it's a poo-poo platter. It's not like this massively awesome bit of flexibility. So if Denver couldn't get any of those guys, I'm not surprised that they just went and committed to Dario Saric. And to me, it made sense. It makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about Dario the player now before we go to break. Dario came off of a torn ACL back in the 2021 season, I believe. Let me just confirm that is true. I think 2021 season, he was coming off of a torn ACL, he tore his ACL and missed the entire 2021-2022 season. And because of that, he's been kind of rehabbing. He's trying to figure it out. And as Cedric says in the comments, same year as Jamal, almost the same situation as Jamal, where used the entire 2022-23 season to sort of rehab, recover. And then this last year, 2023-24, it's sort of where he gets back to his, what he's normally going to be doing for teams going forward. He's 30 years old. He's not this spring chicken anymore, but he is kind of in that sweet spot as a veteran where he's got a few more good years left in him. And I think he's an old enough player and a smart enough player that he's going to be helpful for this Nuggets team going forward. There's a lot to like about what Saric brings to the Nuggets. First and foremost, he is a good shooter who can space the floor. I threw this in my article, and I think that this is an important point for why the Nuggets did this. As I now have to go back to my article. Among all 48 players in the NBA this season that were 6'10" and taller and played 1,000 minutes. So Saric played about 1,100 minutes. He's on the lower end of the minute spectrum with that. But here's where he ranked. 10th with 4.4 assists per 100 possessions. 6th with 8.7 three-pointers attempted per 100 possessions. And 11th with a 37.6% three-point percentage. So he is a spacer and a passer. He can do both of those things really well, or at least he did them really well with the Warriors. And I think that is exactly what the Nuggets were hoping for with this. I mean, think about some of the players that they have on the roster currently and who played last year for the second unit. Zeke Naji, Zeke Naji, DeAndre Jordan, and Aaron Gordon when they went small ball. Think about how little spacing those guys provide from the center position. Dario shoots, or at least he shot 37.6% from three last year. He attempted 8.7 three-pointers per 100 possessions, which I gotta stress this to people. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope did not shoot a bunch. If you think about it, Dario Saric attempted 8.7 threes per 100 possessions. KCP attempted 6.4 per 100 possessions. Dario was getting them up, and he shoots about 50% of his total shots come from behind the arc. And so it is a clear difference in style from what the Nuggets were getting with some of their other guys. And I think that having variety and having versatility is what's most important. Saric can space the floor. He can do a bunch of different things. He can seal players under the basket as a post-up player. He gets some offensive rebounds. He's not a crazy rebounder by any stretch of the word. He's actually, I would say, a subpar rebounder for the center position. But he's not like so overwhelmed by that either. And I think that the Nuggets, if they have him playing next to another big man, their rebounding will be just fine. Or at least not like horrible like it was this last year, frankly. Look, the other great thing about Saric, actually, I'll save that for the second segment. Weaknesses in Saric's game: horrible shot blocker, like about as poor in that case as you could possibly get. 10 blocks total last year in 1,100 minutes. In his career, he has 96 blocks, which is not a lot. For posterity's sake, Zeke Naji this last year had 38 in 576 minutes. He actually protected the rim reasonably well. Peyton Watson in his near 1,500 minutes had 88 total blocks in comparison to Dario Saric's 96 blocks over the course of his entire career. And then, as I mentioned, Saric is not a good defensive rebounder specifically, and he is not a good mover of his feet on the defensive end either. He is going to be a weakness for the Nuggets defensively, and that will hurt them at times. Now, there are ways that they can get around that. Most notably, if you pair Peyton Watson and Dario Saric together, I believe that is a very interesting, unique combo at the 4 and the 5. If Denver decides that they want to go small, Watson can't really shoot. Saric can. Watson can protect the rim. Saric can't. They will struggle as rebounding, but I believe that they'll be more coherent than they were in previous seasons, and that really helps. So we'll talk about all the rotations. We'll talk about all of that stuff. I am very curious as to how the Nuggets end up breaking it down, but I'm going to give my thoughts on different lineups, I think, that makes sense with Saric out there. We will be right back. But first, I got to tell you about our good friends over at Number 38, the affiliate area, the affiliate restaurant for Mile High Sports, for Denver Stiffs. If you're looking for Stiffs night outs, those will be back in stock October, November, December. We are going to be pairing together with number 38. I'm really excited about this. Get out to a watch party. Go watch us do a post-game podcast or a pre-game show and meet the crew. Have a good time. Inside, outside, doesn't matter. Lots of great stuff. There are wings. There are brunch foods. There's pizza. And really great fried chicken. It's one of the better fried chicken places that I've had, at least lately. So really interested in number 38, and I think you will be too. Make sure to go check it out in Rhino and let them know that you came from Mile High Sports. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, let's get back to it. Pickaxe and Roll. Ryan Blackburn here. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. Appreciate all the love and support on the podcast as always. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. As I raced home from Hugo, Colorado, clear out in who knows where, just to make sure to get back here to be able to cover this effectively. Saric. I expect him to be Denver's first big man off the bench. I expect that. I don't think that there's any surprise there. Peyton Watson will be their first forward off the bench. He might even be their sixth man. Not sure how that's going to work. But I think when Denver decides that they want to rest either Aaron Gordon or Nikola Jokic, I think that they will bring in Saric, at least at the beginning. It is very possible that Daron Holmes sort of takes off, and maybe he's the guy who eventually becomes Denver's first big off the bench. But in terms of the first option off the bench for a regular season rotation, teams could do way worse than having Dario out there. And because the Nuggets have Jokic, because they have Aaron Gordon, who was a borderline all-star a couple years, or the year before, and then Jokic is the best player in the world, the job that Saric is going to have is not going to be too crazy. And I think because he fits really well with Denver's bigs, his skill set is going to be important, but also very malleable to what the Nuggets can do. Denver doesn't have a lot of shooting. They don't have a lot of guys that space really well. Aaron Gordon's not a spacer. Daron Holmes might be a spacer. We'll have to figure it out at the NBA level, but I do think that he's going to be around the rim a lot. And so when Denver decides to go with an all-bench unit, for example, let's say they play Peyton Watson, Daron Holmes, Dario Saric. They can do that, and Saric can be at the top of the key, commanding things a little bit. And I am looking forward to seeing how he handles things with Jamal Murray. If Russell Westbrook is the guy that gets into town, how is Russ going to handle that? The great thing about Russell Westbrook is that he would, if he ultimately does become the guy that Denver adds, he draws a lot of rim pressure. And if Saric is spacing out to the three-point line, I can see pick and pops with Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric being very, very interesting options, at least within the gist of what Denver would try to do. And so Denver can do that. They can do things with Jamal Murray and Dario Saric. He's a good dribble handoff guy, somebody who is going to turn the ball over on occasion, but more than anything, like he just knows what he's doing out there and can space, he can dive, he can pop to the mid-range, he'll provide space for what other guys are trying to do. I think that he and Michael Porter could combine on some actions. Both of those guys can shoot. Both of those guys being 6'10" should be pretty good. There's a lot of different ways that they can approach this, but if I were Denver, I would be trying to bring in Saric for Jokic most of the time and just use him as the primary backup big. And then you can have whoever he's playing with at the 4 be, whether it's Watson, is that provides a little bit more rim protection, a little bit more athleticism. If it is Aaron Gordon, same sort of thing, but a little bit more strength added on top of that, as well as Gordon is a good passer and a pretty solid passer for his position as well. So there are different things that Denver could do if Gordon decides to stagger, or if the Nuggets decide that that's the direction that they want to go. And then Porter playing the 4, I think, is also very interesting for Denver, where you have, let's say it's Russell Westbrook as the point guard. You've got Saric picking and popping for 3, and you've got Porter and let's say it's Julian Strawther spacing up in the corners. That's a lot of room. That's a lot of space. And I think that there's something exciting about that Denver could realistically go 5 out now. Saric being out there, Michael Porter, the only non-shooter that they'd potentially have out there with the second unit, Russell Westbrook and Peyton Watson. Denver can deal with that, especially when it's a second unit. It's not that crazy. Playoffs, it gets a little bit more tough on both ends of the floor for Denver. Obviously, if Jokic is not out there, Denver's probably going to struggle in most lineups. But I do think that a Jamal Murray, Dario Saric dribble handoff game, pick and pop kind of game, I think that would be just fine in most of those cases. And really, you just have to survive for 8 to 10 minutes. That's the hope every playoffs. I think that Denver can do that. I think that Dario can really help out there. So people should feel pretty positive about this, I think. I know that there's some other things that Denver's got to figure out with the rest of their rotation, but in terms of bigs, Saric is kind of the perfect option for where Denver's at, in my opinion, where you've got 2 guys in Jokic and Gordon, who are your inked in pen, like they are going to be your main guys, and that's just what you need for, like, that's where you're mostly going to go to. Saric could potentially play with Jokic on occasion. That lineup would be pretty horrible defensively, but offensively, I don't see any reason why it would be bad. And then Gordon, I do like the Gordon-Saric pairing in theory. Gonna have to see how it plays out in practice, but the overall level of basketball IQ, of space, of understanding of how to play, understanding what Denver needs, I just think it will be better. And that's an exciting aspect of this. Denver can go 2 bigs at the same time off the bench with Deron Holmes and Dario Saric. In theory, both of them can shoot, both of them can dive, both of them can pass. And as long as Denver has a point guard that can sort of set the table for that, I think that Denver's going to be better with their bench than I initially thought. Just more that I think about what Saric can bring, I think it's going to be good. Now, the counter to that, if I go and look at what Saric does for the most part, and as I lose my place on my basketball reference sheet, in his previous season, Saric played 57 games. Part of that was because he's rehabbing from an ACL injury. This year with Golden State, he only played 64. I'm not sure how many of those were like DNP coaches' decisions or if they were injury related. Looks like several of them down the stretch were injury related, although he kind of fell out of the rotation in March and then April for the Warriors. If I click on one of the games that they lost, they're starting Trace Jackson Davis, Jonathan Kuminga, Andrew Wiggins. Yeah, look, the Warriors were kind of a mess, and they did not have the bigs that you need in order to sort of define what those roles are supposed to be. Kevon Looney really struggled for them last year, and like guys like Trace Jackson Davis were better than I think people expected. And so you have a lot of guys that are sort of in the same boat, obviously, of the Draymond Green situation. I thought that Dario was helpful for them, and might not have been perfect, but I do think that he's one of those guys. He knows how to play. He knows how to be helpful. The defense, like I said before, that is going to be a challenge. But if there's one thing the Nuggets actually have, it's the ability to insulate a mobility challenged big man as a center. Like they've done it with Jokic. And while Jokic does have some things that he's capable of doing as like a steals guy for the most part, What the Nuggets have needed around him is defensive athletes in order to sort of reach the perimeter, protect at the rim, do everything kind of behind what Jokic does. I think Saric can be part of that too. Gordon's a good backline defender in that situation. Peyton Watson, in theory, is a good backline defender. And then you mix and match Christian Brown into that with the starters, and that could be solid. And then in theory, Russell Westbrook is going to be one of the other guys that they add into that mix. So there are still like positives there. I don't want to sit here and say that Denver is like unbelievable. Their bench is still probably going to be bad. But the real question is like, are they bad or are they worse? And I think that they're just like, the bench is just bad at this point. And you start to see where the vision is going. I'm kind of assuming that Russell Westbrook is the guy that really comes in here and helps figure some things out. That might be a bad situation because like all the reporting, things that I've heard behind the scenes, all of those things say that Russell Westbrook's going to be in Denver. And if he is in Denver, I think this addition for Saric makes a lot of sense. If they can't get that done, we'll see. Okay, let's take one more break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what's next, including some breaking news on Vlatko Cancar. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we're back. Isn't it nice to be able to talk about some things? Isn't it nice? That seems like it's been a little bit. Denver has been like DOA since the beginning of free agency. And now it's actually like a pretty solid thing that they're looking to do here with Dario. I think that that's going to be a very exciting thing for Nuggets fans. And I think that it sort of facilitates some of these next steps for what the Nuggets are going to try to do. First, I didn't really plan this. Let me try to go to my Twitter. No, it's not enough. Not enough time. The Nuggets at this point have a very limited financial picture available to them. Very limited. I'm looking at it right now on my Twitter. If you want to go over there and check it out, then you can. Their multi-year salary cap sheet. If you look at the bottom left of that sheet that I posted on Twitter, Denver has, for 2 more roster spaces, $10.7 million in flexibility. In flexibility that they have to be able to sign 2 more players, to add 2 more players. They've got 13 roster spots committed, but it looks like they're now having 14. Vlatko Cancar is going to sign a contract with the Nuggets. I'm not sure what that contract is ultimately going to be. Denver has the flexibility to give him some more money if they want to. I think it's ultimately going to be a minimum, but it wouldn't surprise me if they decide to give him a slight bump in salary. This is actually a good question. Hurricane asks, can't they only sign using the minimum? I don't know. And because Vlatko is a player that they've had under team control for a long time, so they should have his bird rights to be able to sign a new contract and to be able to sign him, give whatever he wants. They may not, but I actually don't know. I think the plan is just to give him the minimum, so this is like a moot point. And the reason why they're giving him the minimum, our guy Jake Statsquatch, Jake Coyne, on Twitter, he was basically saying that Vlatko's team option, the club option, is actually lower in terms of what it would pay him than a minimum contract because he has a number of years accrued, I think, in the NBA. I think it's 5, 6, it's one of the two. And the cap hold that Denver would have to pay is actually less as well for a minimum. So it's a nice little bit of business for Denver if they're able to do that. So I think, and that was reported, by the way, by Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype. So if you're looking for a person to like identify, Scotto has broken news before. I trust his judgment. I trust his sources. He knows what he's talking about. So if he says the Vlatko is signed, I believe it. It's not a surprise. It's not a surprise. Vlatko's been around the Nuggets. He's actually their fourth longest tenured player behind Jokic, Murray, and Porter. He was drafted back in 2017, came over in 2019, rehabbing from the ACL tear. I saw a comment before saying that he looked bad. Vlatko's looked terrible for Slovenia. Sure, he has, but he's also coming off of a torn ACL. This is his first competitive, like really competitive games that he is playing. So I'm not really surprised that he doesn't look great. Vlatko's going to be on the team. He's one of Jokic's best friends, as Robert mentions in the comments. And I am just not surprised that this is happening. He's also a good player when he's when he's healthy and ready to go. He is a good connective player. What I will say, there is a little overlap between Saric and Vlatko Cancar. How much Cancar actually plays, especially when Peyton Watson has grown into the player that he has and looks like he's going to be a very important piece for Denver. I think that it's probably unlikely that Vlatko's going to play that much. But that's okay. You don't need him to play that much. He's in a different category, I think. So that leaves the 15th man and maybe something else. 15th man is looking like it's going to be Russell Westbrook. There's been reporting every single day from multiple sources, not just mine. I don't really have like a bunch of sources. I have people that tell me things on occasion. But from people that are newsbreakers, Russell Westbrook to the Nuggets is like the main thing that's happening right now for the Clippers. They just had a massive deal that they got done, the Charlotte Hornets and the Nuggets deal, that actually turned into a 6-team trade between the Hornets, the Nuggets, the Warriors, the Mavericks, and 2 other teams. It might be the Clippers, I don't know. But it turned into a big, massive deal that I think a lot of people had to figure out how it was going to go. It had to go official. I wonder if now that that has happened, we will be banning you. Sorry. I wonder now that that has gotten done, that the Nuggets are then able to get Russ. Jokic clearly wants Russ. I talked about that in the last podcast. And that to me seems like the last major thing that the Nuggets have to do. There are still holes in their rotation. Could their starting shooting guard be better than Christian Brown? Sure. Could they have more shooting off the bench? Sure. Is it going to happen? Probably not. But the next best thing that they can do is get a player that can handle the ball, and Russell Westbrook can definitely do that. So I still expect that to get done. I still expect the Nuggets to ultimately find a way to do it. There's ways that they could try, from absorbing him into the traded player exception that they just received from Reggie Jackson. I know that the new CBA rules are a little bit more ambiguous in terms of what was I saying? Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Anyway, Russ is the one who's likely to get it done. I think he will be helpful for the Nuggets. I think he makes sense for sure. I do think that the Nuggets at this point, there's only one other move that I think they could make beyond that, and that is trading Zeke Naji. Because you look at the rotation and you look at all the bigs that the Nuggets have. Jokic, Gordon, Dario Saric, Deron Holmes, who they just drafted, DeAndre Jordan, Zeke Naji, Peyton Watson can slide to the 4. He'll probably play a lot of backup power forward, and then Michael Porter can play some power forward. So they've got a lot of power forward and center options on the roster. I don't think that they need Zeke in order to do that. It is funny, like, could Saric and Zeke play together? Probably. Like, they probably could. There's something to that. Like, Zeke would then be more of a power forward type. Saric would be involved in the action a little bit more frequently. Maybe Zeke can get back to shooting, trying to get back into like spacing the floor, operating on the baseline, things like that, not being as involved in the action. And then he would, like, he's still a very solid defender. If he wasn't the only big man on the floor trying to rebound, maybe there's something to that. I just kind of think that this offseason has been all about finding replacements for Zeke Naji. Like, you had Deron Holmes, you had Dario Saric, you bring back DeAndre Jordan, and like Denver still has Michael Porter, Aaron Gordon, and Peyton Watson on their team. Yeah, I just don't think that this is the thing. We'll see. We will see. Oh, and by the way, I forgot Hunter Tyson. Like, Hunter Tyson's on the team, and he's like I think he's probably more of a power forward than a small forward. So, like, there's just a lot of guys. So I think that Denver's going to try to move him. He's still 23 years old. He's got that 4-year contract, but it is descending in each of the years. And a team should be like more than willing at this point, especially a rebuilding team. I would think Chicago would be interested, especially like they just lost DeMar DeRozan and they're clearly in a rebuilding phase. Why not try to acquire a player like Zeke Naji? And Denver maybe takes back somebody like a Javon Carter in that case, who's not rebuilding. I don't know. That would be my recommendation. I'm not sure if Zeke is a tradable asset right now, and I think Denver might have to give up something in order to trade him. And so that's one of the things that you're probably lacking in this case. Denver would have to figure out, like, are we willing to move more assets in order to trade Zeke? And they moved a lot of assets in order to trade Reggie Jackson, moved assets in order to trade up for Deron Holmes. They don't have any more second-round picks available. They only have one first-round pick. Can they move Zeke Naji and the 2031 first-round pick for a rotation player? Is that something? I don't know. Todd says Zeke and a 2031 first-round pick for Walker Kessler would be nice. Get a true backup center, help us to compete against the 7-footers. That would be unbelievable because it's not happening. Like, Walker Kessler's a really good player, and I do know that Walker's not necessarily like he may not be long for Utah, that's for sure, but I do think that I just don't think that that's viable. Hurricane says here, Chicago traded Caruso for Giddey. They could easily send AO for Zeke. That's the ideal one. That's the perfect one. If you can do that, if you can somehow find a way, like if it's AO for Zeke Naji and the 2031 first round pick, that would be ideal. I don't see any reason why Chicago would do that, but Chicago's not the sharpest tool in the shed. So who knows? Maybe they are interested. They did just add Chris Duarte in that sign and trade that was a 3-team sign and trade that sent DeMar to Sacramento. So who knows? Maybe they need to free up some space. Maybe they're more willing to kind of take on a big man like that and trade out a guard. I just kind of think it would be Javon Carter in that situation. And if they were to get Javon Carter, I'd be fine with it if I were Denver, because Denver just needs bodies that can really help out. I think Javon would be fine. So, look, we'll see what they do. I don't know what they'll ultimately end up with, but I kind of think that it's basically like, I don't know if Zeke is going to be traded. And if that's the case, then I think Denver's 15-man roster, if it is just adding Vlatko and Russell Westbrook, that's fine. I think that is a low to mid 50s winning team, especially in the Western Conference where things are pretty tough. The West just keeps getting better. Teams like New Orleans, Sacramento have really loaded up. San Antonio is going to be even better. Like, there just aren't that many free wins. There's not. And Denver's going to have to navigate that. They really will. The good news is that the Nuggets, I think, added a player in charge that will be helpful, that will give them a little bit of stability that will help them figure some things out on that bench unit. And he is a great stopgap for Daron Holmes stepping into a larger role when he is ready. Not when the Nuggets are ready and not when they need to kind of facilitate that. But when Daron Holmes is ready, hopefully the Nuggets will be ready too. Okay. I think that's going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, folks. Saturday night, we have over 200 people in here. This is awesome. I really appreciate you stopping by, and thank you for joining in. I know everybody's really excited. The Nuggets finally did something. They finally made a move, at least something that's been announced. Really appreciate it. Make sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, especially if you're new. If you are just popping in, share it out. I know that lots of folks are looking for Nuggets content, and if you have a Nuggets fan in your life that you don't like, you want to introduce them to somebody, send them over here. Send them Pickaxe and Roll. Would really appreciate it. All right. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Appreciate all the love and support on the podcast. As always, hit that like button on the way out. We will talk to you guys very soon.